In today's episode, I have a special guest joining me for the first segment, and later I'll talk to Laine Berry, one half of our Restoration Nation. She has some great stories to tell us. But first, I am Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and you're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2023, and I don't know, 2022 was fine. I don't know that any of us would say it was stellar, but 2023, it's looking up, right? Anyway, I have a special guest here with me today. Hi.
Hi.
This is Andy, my husband, Andy. And the reason why he is here is because, well, he's going to do the Q&A segment with me and just this beginning section. But how are you feeling about 2023?
Oh, this is going to be the best year ever.
The best year ever.
Best year ever. 2022 was okay. Better than 2020. Remember that?
Yeah, and there wasn't a 2021, if I remember correctly.
Forgot it.
Yeah, it didn't exist. Well, Andy, thanks for being here. You're home for the holidays. You're now living in Salt Lake City, and I'm here in Western New York.
Yes, that's a lot of back and forth, isn't it?
It is a lot of back and forth, but surprisingly, it's already been 1 year.
It has been. It's been a interesting year. Starting a new job and meeting new people.
Right.
It's been exciting.
Well, the reason I thought you and I could do this portion together is because whenever I ask on Instagram or something, ask me a question, old house related, window related, invariably the questions I actually get are, when are you moving to Utah? And have you chosen a new house?
I get those questions a lot from the other side. When's your family coming to Utah?
Right. So I thought it would be fun. We could answer that question. When am I moving, or when are we going to be living together? And I thought it'd be kind of interesting and fun to talk about the next house we're looking for.
Hey, how's Tuesday work for you?
Tuesday. I'm sorry, I'm booked on Tuesday. I'm not going to be able to pack this house and move by Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I guess the answer to when am I moving is really when our daughter graduates from high school.
Sure.
And that is, she's 11th grade. She has one more year, and then we'll be making some decisions about what to do after that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not ideal as far as the timing goes, but it's, to me, kind of a short-term sacrifice for setting our daughter up for a more successful launch, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, she's got a lot of great stuff going on here, and it's okay going back and forth a lot. Don't mind.
No.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I like having two places. It's kind of fun. A winter home and another winter home.
Yeah. Usually people do that differently, don't they? They have a winter home and a place warm to go in the winter, but instead we have two snowy homes. I actually kind of like that too. And you and I had always talked about, we were talking about our kind of retirement plans, which are a little ways off. We're not that old. But we've always talked about maybe having more than one place to go, or at least doing quite a lot of traveling during that time. So in one way, it's nice to be able to do that now when we're not of retirement age. We're a little bit younger and we can really take advantage of the things that we are capable of doing and like to do at this point.
Yeah, I've been fully taking advantage.
Yes.
I haven't been working a lot on the house. I've been hiking and skiing and making the most of my weekends.
Right. And I'm a little jealous. I have to say, I'm a little jealous of that.
I'm trying to make you jealous.
Right, because you want me to move there sooner.
Yeah, I want you to be there with me.
So that's kind of a good segue into talking about what kind of place we're looking for, because you have really embraced apartment and condo living.
This is the first time I've lived in a downtown urban area in a large city, and it's been kind of fun. I don't have a yard to maintain. I have lots of things within walking distance for restaurants and activities and shows. And get to a canyon within a mile of the place. So I do like the city. I'm starting to like the city life. We've always lived in the country.
Well, yes, but we do.
Small town. Yeah,
small town. I was going to say, we live in a town right now. And I remember you having to talk me into that because I thought, I want, property, 2 acres or whatnot, surrounded by trees. And I'm actually really glad that we live in town because it's absolutely walkable. Our kids could get jobs and walk to work instead of driving. So it did end up being a good thing here living in this town. I haven't lived in Salt Lake City. I've just visited, but I can certainly see the draw. And there are plenty of neighborhoods in the downtown area. So that is a possibility. But what kind of house are you looking for?
Well, not to belabor the point, but I would always start with the location, right?
Sure.
That is probably the most important factor. We enjoy nature and a lot of outdoor activities. So luckily, around Salt Lake, there's a lot of that all over the place. It's very much surrounded by the mountains. Yeah, I don't want the hour and a half commute I had in California, and even the 30-minute commute that sometimes turned into an hour and a half during a blizzard.
And that is something that's really different, is that we don't need 2 cars if we live in Salt Lake City. And I think both you and I would like to downsize in that way to not be using as much.
I agree. I definitely want a smaller home. There was a time when we definitely needed a bigger home, and we were overcrowded in that small home in California. But now I think we're getting past the point where we need a home this big.
Yeah. And I think the houses, though, in Salt Lake City are super weird. Like, I'm really into the bungalows, which I love. But of course, most people tear out the windows, and we call those dead-eyed bungalows because it's like their soul has been sucked out. They have these just plain, boring windows in the front where they used to have, beautiful leaded glass and even decorative glass up on the top section. But also, Salt Lake City is known for having large families. So, you might have an 1,800 square foot bungalow, but it'll have 5 bedrooms. And you're like, where in the world are those 5 bedrooms? And I assume they're in the basement.
Yeah, but we can always turn those into a man cave.
All 5 of them. 5 separate man caves. Yeah, so it is a little strange because although we're downsizing, it's very difficult to find a house that has the things that we want. And honestly, I'm being kind of picky because we are finally in a position of want instead of need. Like, every time we've ever had to move, we've been having to find a house. Like, you have to find a house because your rental contract is over, or you are moving right away, or whatever. And this time we can just sort of take our time and not really rush.
I would like to wait for the interest rates to come back down, or just make sure that it's the right time to buy and it's affordable. I think there's some things that I've learned that I like about our house that I want to keep. And this is going to sound like one of those shows where, house hunting shows where I want a beachfront house surrounded by a national park for $350. But
no ceiling fans. Yeah.
But no, there are some things I do want to preserve. Like, for example, I like having my own closet because you're just way more organized, and I don't want to be organized. And and it was a little crowded. It was a little tight in that small home.
Yeah.
With sharing a closet. So that's about it. I just need a closet.
You just need a closet. All right. Well, my needs are a little bit more than that. My needs are greater than that. I actually like a big kitchen. I've never had a big kitchen. And I guess our kitchen is not huge, but it's large by all the other standards. We've had a galley kitchen. We've had a small little, I don't know. We had a weird, sometimes we've had a big kitchen, but it was poorly laid out. And I really like the size of our kitchen and the amount of space. I like a big bedroom. I didn't think I would care about that, but I kind of like the big bedroom. Lots of windows, indoor, outdoor life.
Yeah. As for the kitchen, I like the functionality of the kitchen. I think, we have an oversized pantry. I think we're not going to need that as much. Maybe I move out of the apartment and the boys move into the apartment.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. There is a really interesting thing about the houses in Salt Lake City, too, is a lot of them have ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So they either have a place for, I don't know, in our case, maybe a child or 2, but they might have, a place for in-laws. It's very interesting to me how many places have these ADUs attached.
Yeah, they have the 2 doors, the 2-door houses. You just use one for the children, the other family.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about those houses on here. I'm hoping to find somebody who owns one so that we can have them as a guest on here. But they have these houses where, of course, at one point, polygamy was a tenet of the faith of the Mormon religion. I want to be clear and say that is no longer true. Those are fundamentalists, not the case anymore. So the men, they would have a house built basically with 2 front doors so that they could have their families separate, but they were all living together under one roof, which I think is very interesting. I'm sure we can come up with a guest that has a really interesting story to talk about. So I don't know. I mean, the segment's been going on pretty long. I just wanted to come on and tell about what our plan was, hopefully answer that question and talk about, I don't know, I guess you are looking for things Like you really don't like to work on the house. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's no wrong answers, right, on
Right,
this show.
no.
If I said I'd just tear down whatever old house is there and build something completely modern, that'd be okay, right?
Absolutely not. And he's also joking. Thank you very much.
No, I think that would be nice. Part of a smaller house would be, hopefully there wouldn't be as much to do. This was overwhelming in a large house for me. You seem to thrive on it.
Well, there is some thriving and there is also some surviving. I admit that the size of it is overwhelming to me. Not so much what's to fix, but what's to clean. That's the part that gets me. I'm like, how do people clean these houses? I don't even understand it.
That and the range of emotions, just the little bathroom that it took you through. I mean, it was a roller coaster, but it always finishes lovely.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's another good point, is that the bathroom is finished. I mentioned that on a previous episode, and the blog post is written, and you can go see that bathroom. It was a journey. It was an up and down journey, thousands of dollars more than I would have ever spent on that bathroom.
Yeah, it took longer than the kitchen.
It took longer than the kitchen. It sure did. It took a year, 15, 16 months. I don't know. It took forever. All right. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being here.
I love it. I should come back
You
and
should
visit sometime.
Yeah, I think you should. I like having you here.
I like being here.
Well, this segment was a little out of the norm. Like I said, it was a new year. Andy was here, wanted him to come on and we could chat about that, answer that question. But if you have an old house related question that you would like for me and a guest to answer on an upcoming episode, please just head on over to truetalesfromoldhouses.com and submit it through the contact page, or you can send me a message through social media. Thanks again, Andy.
Thanks. It was a pleasure. And as always, you're wonderful and beautiful.
I didn't tell you to say that, did I?
I don't know. Remember, you told me to say something, but not that.
But not that. Okay. Thanks again, Andy.
Thanks.
It's time to pause to say that True Tales from Old Houses continues this season only because of the generous support from our sponsors. Once again, we are supported by the Window Course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog. The Window Course is a step-by-step do-it-yourself window restoration program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. The Window Course offers all of the start-to-finish video instruction you need right now, and hands down, Scott is one of the best teachers in this business. You're going to learn so much. I know a lot of us are wrapping up the hardcore window restoration projects from summer, me included, but these colder months are the perfect time to take the Window Course because you have time to really absorb the content. Then you can hit the ground running in the spring. There are also plenty of smaller window restoration tasks you can tackle during the winter, like lubricating pulleys and doing lower sash maintenance. The course is self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or the Training Package, then you'll get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. And even better, the Window Course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've got an active coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. So for 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use my coupon code, TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Sutherland Wells, maker of exceptional polymerized tung oil finishes since 1965. All of the Sutherland Wells products are handcrafted in Providence, Rhode Island, with the highest quality, sustainably grown tung oil. Tung oil native to China has been used for centuries as a durable finish for wood, metal, and stone. Unlike polyurethane, tung oil finish penetrates the surface of the wood so it flexes and contracts as conditions change, making it the perfect pre-finish or protectant for everything from fine furniture to window sash and sills. I love that I've been getting direct messages about my process since I started adding Sutherland Wells products to my oil primer for added flexibility and penetration, most recently for window projects, and I am so pleased about how smooth the top coat of paint looks, and dry wood just drinks it up. Specifically for pre-coat, I use Clarabelle's, but Sutherland Wells has an entire product line for whatever you're working on right now. Siding, hardwood floors, furniture restoration, cutting boards, you name it. To learn more about the complete product line, visit Sutherland Wells, that's WELLES, sutherlandwells.com, and to save 10% on your first order, use my coupon code TRUETALES. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Preservan, a unique preservation franchise opportunity developed by longtime window restoration pro Ty McBride. The mission of Preservan is to save the future by preserving the past. So what exactly is Preservan? Well, what if you could go to work every day on your own terms while also doing something meaningful within your community? What if you could start a home service business without owning complicated and expensive tools that are difficult to transport to and from job sites? The team at Preservan will train and support you to operate a Preservan business in your community, equipping you with the tools you need to perform sustainable wood rot repairs and build your own team of epoxy techs. You'll receive the playbook for a proven preservation business, exclusive access to EverResin epoxy products, business software, and all of the marketing, advertising, training, and technical support you need. Owning a preservation franchise offers the perfect opportunity for work-life balance while serving your neighbors and community in a recession-proof industry. You'll get to work your own hours and spend the rest of your time in ways that are important to you. To learn more about becoming part of the Preservan family and their mission, go to Preservan, Preservan, preservanfranchise.com/truetales. My guest today is Laine Berry, one half of the amazing duo from our Restoration Nation, and she's here to tell us apocryphal stories.
I'm so excited to be here with you today, Stacy. I'm Laine Berry. My husband and I have our Restoration Nation on Instagram, YouTube, and then, of course, our webpage, ourrestorationnation.com. And like you, we are preservationists that are passionate about historic architecture.
Welcome back, Laine Berry.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here again. I didn't know if I'd get to visit with you again, so this is fun.
I know. I was thinking today, I thought it's almost like going out to coffee or something with a friend, having you back.
Right?
So I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you are a multi-talented lady. So the reason we're together today is to talk about apocryphal stories. Those are stories that people accept hook, line, and sinker, never even questioning whether or not they could be true. And I saw you talking about a bunch of those on Instagram one day, and I thought, oh, that would be great if she would come back on the podcast and tell me some of those stories, or tell this audience some of those stories. But before we get started, I wanted to say you and Kevin have your own podcast now. Is that correct?
That is correct. Ours is a little bit different than yours. Yours is for the masses, which is wonderful. We have a private membership group that we have on our restorationnation.com. You just go to the community page, click there, and it includes the podcast, which is weekly, which is Kevin and I just talking about whatever things have happened that week in our restoration journeys. And then it's got tips and tricks videos, a blog, how-tos, recipes, all kinds of fun things. So it's a little community page for people who are involved in, our huge circle, but want to be involved in kind of a more intimate way. It's a little more intimate interaction there. And the podcast is part of that.
Well, fantastic. I'll link it in the show notes for sure.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited to give it a listen at some point. So great. Congratulations on all of your endeavors.
And all my free time, we're just filling all those moments with something else.
Yeah. Who needs free time, right?
I don't even know what that is anymore.
Okay. Well, let's start with these stories. So just you start us off. Tell me a story.
Well, so I do want to make clear that apocryphal stories, a lot of people don't have any idea what that really means. And you got you got the second half of the definition a little bit earlier, but the actual definition of apocryphal is it is a story of dubious beginning. So it's very unlikely to be true, but has been repeated so many times that it becomes part of the lore. It becomes accepted as truth over time. So the really important part is of dubious beginnings that really, as an architectural historian, makes my eye twitch when I go to a house tour, a historic home tour, a historic house museum, and there's a very well-meaning docent who's been given his or her script from which they read. They've memorized their script so well, and we get these crazy apocryphal stories. I think the reason we get them is because for some reason, people think architecture isn't interesting enough on its own, and we have to add these little tidbits to, stick with people and make it interesting. But if you just look at the architecture, there's plenty of interest on its own. We don't need to add the extra, right? Now, some of these apocryphal stories do have some basis in truth. So we're going to have some today that are just completely apocryphal. There's absolutely no truth to them whatsoever. And then there are some that are kind of in a gray area a little bit. So we'll go through a bunch of them today.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So let's start with the one you hear the most.
The one I hear the most is probably the cross and Bible door. And this is the one that people get really up in arms about because, of course, faith and religion are so important to people. It's such a personal thing. And people who when we correct the cross and Bible door, they take it as some kind of, merit strike against their faith instead of just saying, no, your architecture and your faith don't have to be one and the same. So the cross and Bible door, an early 4-panel door, and we still use them in houses today. You see the 2 large panels on the top, 2 small panels on the bottom, and what appears to be a cross in between them. And the Apocrypha is that our early forefathers made these doors to have the bottom 2 panels represented the open Bible, the cross represented the cross of Christ, to protect them from witches. And that's why we have the cross and Bible doors. What that does not take into account is the fact that we have an entire community of people in Virginia in the colonial era, early 1600s, who were Jewish, who have this same type of door on their home. So if the purpose of this was to represent Christ, it makes no sense whatsoever for these, wealthy Jewish merchants to have these doors on their homes to protect them from witches. So it kind of plays into that idea that our forefathers were very superstitious and that their entire lives revolved around religion.
And witches.
Right. Very superstitious about the witches, and we have to be very religious. When the truth is just, this was a common, fairly simple door to construct. It was incredibly sturdy. And so it was the best door to put on homes. And that's why we still use it today. That's why it's still used constantly. It's because it's a sturdy, fairly simple to construct door. And that's the truth of the story. Unfortunately, for people who love the idea of the cross and the Bible and the witches.
Are you sure there's no witches?
Right. Well, I mean, I know it's you, but and that one kind of goes hand in hand with the Holy Lord hinges. We see very, very, very early colonial buildings have a wrought iron hinge that if you look at them a certain way, they sort of look like an H and an L. And so the apocryphal story is that they are H and L for a Holy Lord to protect against witches, when in reality, they're just the strongest, sturdiest type of hinge to hold the weight of the door in those early colonial buildings. Not as exciting as witches and warlocks and religion, but amazing in that, the founding fathers, the settlers, the colonists who came here were able to kind of parse out the science and the physics that it took to make these structures with very rudimentary tools. That's the exciting story.
Right. And I'm thinking, when you come here and you've just come from another country and you have to build up an entire place, you don't spend a lot of time being creative. Maybe you just come up with one standard way of making things and you do it over and over again until your life is settled in a way that you can be creative again.
Exactly. And what you do, we often forget, I think many people forget, is that every one of those doors that you look at is a marvel unto itself, because these are people who were felling the trees, drawing the lumber, hand cutting the lumber, hand planing the lumber, putting all of these things together by hand. There was absolutely no machinery involved in these early door or building construction methods. And so that in and of itself is a fantastic, fascinating story. When you think about the time and effort it took to construct one door, one element of a colonial home, that is an amazing story. We don't need to involve superstition on top of that.
Right. Absolutely. Now, you brought up a good point. So, I have to ask you this, but why do we believe you and not the docent from the building that we were visiting at the time?
Because documentation, his written archival fact supports my story. Sorry. There are, as architectural historians, we rely on science, right? We rely on written record, things that we can track, things that are quantifiable when it comes to what stories we relate with architecture. And there is no scientific basis for the hypothesis that these doors were built to prevent witches from entering your house. We have no written record. You would think that we had a group of people who were so superstitious and so afraid of witches that they were building pieces of architecture to prevent them coming into their homes. We would have that written down somewhere. One of these architects, one of these builders would have written, made 3 cross and Bible doors for Friar Hamlet, so his house is protected from witches at every doorway. But we have none of that. We just have people talking about the process of creating the door, the process of how long it takes to dry the wood, how many pieces of wood it takes to construct the door. We have no written record of any superstitious story to go along with that.
Right. Makes sense. Well, I had to ask you, right?
Of course. Absolutely. That's why it's such a big deal to architectural historians, is because we've traced it. We've done the work to go back. Because, let's be honest, we would all love for some of these stories to be true, because a lot of them are fun and they do add a little bit of spice to our architecture. But if the spice is, spoiled, then it doesn't do anybody any good. So that's why we want to really make sure that there's scientific basis for what we're talking about.
Sure, definitely. So how about another story? Tell us something else.
So another one that we hear all of the time is the window tax. And this is one of the ones that gets into the gray area, right? So you hear we have these walk-through windows. We either have few windows in homes or we have walk-through windows because homes were taxed on the number of windows that they have. And this is one of the ones that's true and false. So in 1781, there was the U.S. direct tax that was passed right after, kind of during the Revolution, to try to raise some funds for the war that was going on and then the building that we were having. And it was on any property that was valued worth more than $100 and sat on more than 2 acres of land. And the number of windows in that structure was to be taken into account in the tax. The only problem with that is that there's no record of that tax ever being collected on anyone ever in the United States. So it got written into law, but it was never collected. And then it was repealed in 1851. So there is a time frame where, it's feasible that buildings were built with the number of windows in mind because people knew this tax was on the record. But one would assume that they would also know the tax was generally not being collected. It was not an enforced tax at that point. So again, that's kind of one of those gray area stories. Is it a story that we really should tell on historic home tours? Probably not, because we don't have that one little piece of evidence that says, hey, people were actually taxed on this. This tax was put into place. And so therefore, we know definitively that's why these windows are like this. Now, that is a tax that was collected in England and Ireland for many, many years. That's where the U.S. got the idea for the tax, but we don't have any evidence of it being collected here in the U.S.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I did not know that.
I love those that are a little like in between, right?
Right. I feel like I'm going to get some messages that are like, no, it's true. They collected taxes in Philadelphia
You will absolutely get messages. And I guarantee you the ones that you're going to get the most messages on are the ones that are religion related, because people tend to get very, very, like I posted that one and people got so mad, and I'm still going to call them cross and Bible doors. And my response is, you can call them whatever you want to. You can call it a cat for all I care. But historically, if we're in a museum house and we have a teaching home and we are teaching historic fact, we cannot call it a cross and Bible door in that environment because it is not historic fact.
Right. That makes sense. All right. Now there's one about a coffin, right? A window, a door.
The coffin curve. Well, actually, there's a coffin curve, a coffin niche, a coffin window, and a coffin door. Lots of things about dead people in old houses, none of which are true.
Let's talk about dead people then. Let's take a few moments to talk about dead people.
One of my favorite topics, actually. I have a strange, morbid curiosity with all things mourning and death related with our ancestors.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, it's something to think about. Like, where did they take their dead? What did they do with it? So I can see how these stories would come about and why people would be so intrigued.
I think one of the reasons that they've become so wildly popular is because the 20th and 21st century attitude towards death is so radically different than the 17th, 18th, 19th century toward death. Up until the 20th century, people convalesced and died at home. They were born at home and they died at home. And so we had all of these rituals surrounding death and dying in the home. The wake was in the home, the funeral was in the home, and the body didn't leave the home until it went to the graveyard or the cemetery. And so we, in our 21st and late 20th and 21st century minds, have created all of these myths around what was already a very regimented practice. So morning practices were very regimented. As we know, there were rules that went along with them, and there were superstitions that went along with death and dying, but we've kind of added on top of those. So two of those being the coffin curve and the coffin niche. We see these beautiful, usually 1850s to 1870s homes that have curving staircases. And often there will be a curved inset niche, 1, 2, or 3 of those going up the staircase. And the apocryphal story is that those staircases were made with a curve, a bend, so that it was easier to get the coffin down. You didn't have to make a hard right turn on a landing. And that the niches facilitated the back end of that coffin to slip into that niche and come on down the staircase. Again, there's no evidence of that being the practice at any point. And if you start to learn about convalescing and dying at home, you learn that if a person took ill, they became sick with tuberculosis or some sort of wasting disease, they were moved downstairs and they would convalesce downstairs, pre-planning in mind. If something happened and the person died upstairs, the morticians or the people who were going to lay out the body would actually go upstairs and wrap the body in a sheet and carry the body down the stairs in the sheet and then lay the body out downstairs. And the body often wasn't placed into the coffin until right before it was going to be moved to the graveyard. Sometimes the wake, the body was in a cooling coffin for the wake, but the coffin, it just physics disproves this one in a lot of ways, because it is a lot easier to bring a body downstairs than it is to lug a coffin upstairs, put a body in it, and then take it downstairs again. The same thing holds true with the coffin window, which we hear about. Why on earth would you slide a body in a coffin out a second-story window? Can you imagine? Like, just a visual image of that. To roll it down the roof line.
This just all seems like a really bad idea. And I'm picturing like a bunch of people down at the bottom just in case it falls. And then, I don't get it.
No, we just take the body downstairs, we put it in the coffin, and we roll it out the front door. And like you mentioned, there's the coffin door. People are like, oh, the door is wider because the coffin. Here's the deal. You think about, again, just the physics. The average door frame on any home is 36 inches wide on the interior of the house. The front doors tend to be a little bit wider, and that's what they would call the coffin door. You got to get the coffin out the front door so it's wider. But the coffin isn't going to be sitting in the entryway. The coffin, the wake would be held in an interior room, usually the front formal parlor. Well, the doorway out of the front formal parlor is only 36 inches, ever. You don't ever see one really wider than that when it's a doorway. Measure your average person shoulder to shoulder. A woman's going to be 16 to 19 inches. A large man is going to be 24 inches. You give or take a couple more inches to squeeze him into a box. You're no more than about 30 or 32 inches wide at the widest for a coffin. So a coffin is going to fit through even the narrowest doorway in a home and then naturally out the front door, no matter how wide it is. Wider front doors were a sign of wealth. It meant that you had more money, that you could do a more elaborate front entrance. And it didn't have anything to do with dragging dead people out the door. Sorry.
Yeah, the stories are more fun, but I think ultimately the way they cared for their dead sounds better than, like you said, trying to get a coffin downstairs or out a window. And
imagine what would happen to that body in the coffin as it's being, manhandled down the stairs. Nobody wants that to happen to grandma or their child, or everyone wants that body treated with respect. And even today, I have several friends who are EMTs, and even today they will say, today, if a body is deceased in a second, third, fourth story, we wrap it in sheets and bring it down. We don't try to get large equipment up to bring a deceased body downstairs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And people were smaller back then.
Yes, they were. That actually brings us to another one that is a good apocryphal story that we hear a lot in historic house tours. We go into historic colonial homes and the ceilings are very low. And you hear docents say the ceilings are low because people were short. Yes, the ceilings are low. Yes, people were shorter. But that's not why the ceilings were low. The ceilings were low because most of our colonial buildings are up in the northeast part of the country. And as you know, living in the northeast part of the country, the winters are brutal. These are buildings that they're trying to heat with an open fireplace, which is a really inefficient heating source. So they kept the ceiling low to keep the heat from rising and escaping, trying to keep their living space warm. So yes and no. Yes, they were smaller. Yes, the ceilings were low, but they were not low because the people were shorter. Now you will see lower banisters and lower doorknobs on doors. Those are because people were shorter. The average man in 1700 was 3.5 inches shorter than the average man in 1900. So yes, if you have a hand banister on your stairway that's 3 inches, too short for us, it's because we are considerably taller, but it has nothing to do with the ceiling height.
Have you ever been to the Laura Ingalls Wilder home in Mansfield, Missouri?
I have not.
Well, the reason why I ask you that is because her husband Almanzo her husband Almanzo built this tiny little kitchen for her because she was a very small woman. And so when you go in there, the countertops almost hit me at the hips. They are so tiny. And the whole house is like that. And it's actually, I think that part is true. I'm sure that heating it played a part in low ceilings and low everything, but he also built all the cabinetry. All the beds were tiny. It was so wild.
Oh, I love that. That's precious. That's precious. So do we want to move on to our next one?
Yeah, let's do more stories, please.
So the whistle walk. This is one that we hear down in the South all the time with either plantation homes or suburban villas from the time of enslavement. So you have a detached kitchen from the house, and then there's a space in between the house and the main house where the food would be brought in by the enslaved people and then served at table. And the apocryphal story is that the enslaved people it's called the whistle walk between the kitchen to the main house because the enslaved people were made to whistle on their way from the kitchen to the main house so that the masters knew they weren't tasting the food. This story is not actually found anywhere in the modern literature of the day. We don't see it until 1954 when a woman writes sort of like a memoir of the Old South. So we know she kind of invented this story. And the thing about that story to me that is so funny is that you're trying to tell me that the people who were in charge of getting the food, preparing the food, plating the food, never took a bite of it. You were only worried about them taking a bite from the time they left the kitchen to the time they got it to the dining room. I'm pretty sure that anytime I'm cooking something, if I want to taste it, I'm going to taste it while I'm cooking it. I'm not going to wait till I get it on the plate and it looks good, right?
Right. Good point.
That is a completely apocryphal story meant to sort of, I think, dehumanize further enslaved people. And it also pulls attention away from why the kitchen is separated. We need to be talking about why the kitchen is separated from the house. We hear all the time that the kitchen was separated purely for fire reasons, which is a large reason that the kitchen was separated from the house. But you also have cooking smells that would have been horrible. Can you imagine cooking fish inside your main home in July? That greasy odor would have permeated everything in the home. It never would have been able to get out. And then the heat, just the heat from that constant open cooking fire would have meant the entire home would have been hot all of the time. So there's 3 reasons that kitchen was detached. That space in between was just to protect from all of those elements. Yes, enslaved people brought the food in, but they were not made to whistle on the way to make sure they weren't testing the food.
Right. Yeah, that one makes no sense at all. You're right.
None at all. And it's repeated with such, I heard it one time and it was repeated with such authority. Like it was just absolutely true. And then my head exploded and it was terrible.
You're really fun at parties, aren't you, Laine?
Terrible at parties.
I'd go to a party with you. I think we'd have a great time.
We would absolutely, yes.
We could shoot each other the side eye every now and then. Like,
right?
What?
Right?
What is this story?
So I have another one that, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say another one, please.
So one that is partly true and partly not true is paint blue. We hear that ceilings in southern porches are painted paint blue to protect from evil spirits and to keep the wasps and bugs from building nests up there. The part that is true is that the paint blue part of the story is true. Paint blue is a color that was brought to the United States by the Gullah Geechee people, who were enslaved people who came from the central and western parts of Africa. Part of their tradition was that color blue protected from all spirits, not just evil spirits, but just helped the spirits in the area settle, rest, and not disturb or interact with the living. You see the blue tree bottles in the yard. You see the paint blue painted on the ceilings. That is to keep the spirits from coming into the home. And their southern slave owners adopted that tradition in the South. And so that is absolutely true. We had the privilege of owning a home in northern Florida, which is where a lot of the Gullah Geechee people were located, northern Florida up into the Carolinas. So that's where you really see that culture. And the neighborhood that we lived in was a neighborhood that had been inhabited since 1562. It had been Spanish, French, English over and over and over. But then the last most recent residents, the 19th and early 20th century residents, were Gullah Geechee people who had built homes there. And there were a few existing houses that all of the walls in the house were painted. They were hand-hewn timber. They were beautiful. They were all painted that beautiful paint blue. So that part of the story is true. The part about bugs mistaking it for the sky and so therefore not building their nest there, insects see on a completely different color spectrum than we do. They perceive color completely differently. They do not perceive the sky as blue. We perceive the sky as blue because, of course, the water reflects into the atmosphere, and so we perceive that color. Insects don't perceive the sky as blue, and so therefore they don't see the blue ceiling as sky. So that's the part that's not true at all.
Oh, you with your science, Laine.
I have another science-based one that is one that we hear over and over and over.
I do want to tell you first, though, that all of the spiders on my Haint Blue ceiling could have told you that the blue did not work.
Well, I've got dirt daubers on mine, so there you go.
But yeah, science-based stories, love it.
Right? So another science-based story is that the reason that old barns were painted red is because that was a bright color that cows could see easily. And so at the end of the day, if the cows had not come home on time, it got a little dark, they could see the red barn. The problem with that one is that cows only see in a color spectrum that allows them to see blue and yellow. So they can't tell that the barn is red. The reason the barns were red is because red was an earth-based pigment. It was very, very cheap and easy paint to produce. And it had a bit of a natural insecticide to it. So if you applied the red paint to the barn lasted longer.
Wow, that's easy enough.
Right? Cows can't see red. You're not helping the cows get home.
Right, definitely. What's your favorite story? Have you already told me your favorite story?
Let me look and see what my favorite. Well, this one actually isn't an architecture story, but this is the one that I think is probably my favorite. And that is the folk art portraits of people are out of proportion because itinerant painters would spend all winter, these folk itinerant painters. Yeah, I told this one on Instagram, spent all winter prepping their canvases and dresses and backgrounds, and they left the head empty. And so they would go around in the springtime to do their portraits, and you got to pick your dress and your background, and he just painted your head in, and that's why they look out of proportion. But again, there's no historic background. Not a single itinerant painter wrote in his diary, spent all winter preparing canvases for a spring painting trip at all. And you would think that with the number of itinerant painters if they were preparing these bulk masses of canvases, that at least one headless canvas would survive in the record. And we don't have even a single example of a headless canvas painted out with dress and background. The truth is that these were just self-taught painters who did very primitive style painting proportion. Anatomy was not their specialty. They did not understand anatomy. They didn't understand depth of field. And they were going around to basically lower to, upper middle class people and providing a service that they could afford. And that's what they could afford. And so we get these much more crude examples of portraiture. And they look like that, not because the head and body were painted at two different times of two different subjects, but just because that's how the artist was able to most closely capture the likeness of the person.
Right. And art is for everyone. So no matter what you could afford, you could find a painter who could meet your budget.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. This is one we're going to talk about a little bit. Apocryphal stories. We tend to think of apocryphal stories as something that relates only to historic architecture, right? That those are stories that are just popping up because we don't understand what happened 200 years ago. But we still have apocryphal stories popping up today. And this one's a little, it's kind of a political hotspot right now, and it has popped up and is very much becoming part of our understanding of real estate and of architecture, but it is apocryphal. And I think it's important that we understand that a lot of study has been done on this topic so that while we can choose not to use terms and phrases that may be upsetting to people, it doesn't necessarily mean that the story that's being perpetrated is the truth. So in the last couple of years, we've seen people backing off from the use of the term master bedroom. And the story that we're hearing over and over and over is that it's because it is in reference to the main bedroom of the master of the plantation, right? That's what we keep hearing.
Right.
But that is not based in truth. In 1995, the U.S. Department of Urban Development did a $10 million study on the phrase master bedroom to make sure that it did not break any of the fair housing guidelines, to make sure that it wasn't a racist statement. And what they discovered was that the term in the United States developed in 1926 when the Sears and Roebuck catalog for the first time was renaming the rooms in the house. So before 1926, each bedroom had been called a chamber. And they were coming up with these new, bigger floor plans, right? They wanted bigger floor plans. And so they wanted a term for the biggest room in the house. So they used the term that was used in Britain, in the great houses of Britain, where you have these huge, estates of the royalty there, and the bedrooms in those houses for the master of the estate and the mistress of the estate. There were two separate bedrooms, and his bedroom was called the master's bedroom. And even today in Britain, it's a term that's used. And you still, if you have a lord or an earl, a duke, he is called the master of the estate, and he's referred to as the master. His son is the young master. You have the mistress. And so that's where that phrase actually originates. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Southern antebellum architecture. But that's where we have to be careful too in using language. We have to be mindful. Yes, the apocryphal story may not be true, but I also don't want to use language that's going to hurt my friends' feelings because they think that it has a connotation for them that is harmful. So I have to kind of balance some of these ideas with, while I know the history of this, I may be careful in the language that I use because I don't want to say anything that's going to be found offensive to my friend or my neighbor. But it's a good example of apocryphal architecture stories that are still popping up today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's worth being sensitive about that. I agree. I did an interview with our town historian, and he was talking about stories that people think are true, and they've just been perpetuated so long that they become part of the lore. So in essence, they are still part of the story, even though they aren't true. And so I can see how that would fall into that area too. It's like people believe it. They believe wholeheartedly that it's true. And that's enough for someone like me to call it a primary bedroom instead of a master bedroom.
Right. I call it a main bedroom. Right. I just
Sure.
call it a main bedroom. And if we wanted to be really, really, really ticky about it, you shouldn't call any main bedroom a master bedroom unless it's a house built after 1926, because that's when the term came into use. So no main bedroom in a house 1926-ish and before is a master, no matter what. It's a main bedroom or it's a chamber. And then if you, just are such a stickler that you have to use it, then only use it on bedrooms after 1926. But I mean, realistically, what does it hurt any of us to call it a main bedroom or a primary bedroom? It doesn't hurt anybody. So just change the language a little bit. But I do think it's it is an interesting modern example of apocryphal architecture for us to look at and really, really kind of dig into and see how these things become part of our lexicon and how we can change them over time. And I think the same thing is true, just like we are not going to use master bedroom, we're going to use main or primary bedroom. We don't call them cross and Bible doors. We just call them 4-panel doors. Or, it's easy to change language to fit into what is appropriate.
I do want to ask you, are there any, or is there a story that you kind of wish were true, even though it's not? Maybe not. Maybe you're so science, and I get it, because there's not anything that I have a hard time letting go of necessarily, but sometimes you think, oh, that just made a really good story.
Yeah. I mean, they're all really good stories. That's what's, I guess, a little frustrating, right? Is the apocryphal stories are all really fun. Like the idea of, young ladies testing their diamond on glass and scratching their names into it to make sure their diamond was real. Well, that's a much more charming story than just historic glass is a little bit softer than modern glass. And so pretty much anything would scratch it. So kids were always scratching on the historic windows. It's much more romantic to say that it was because they were testing to see if the diamonds were real. So if I was going to pick one, that might be the one that I would wish was true. But realistically, I like the truth of it far more. I find the history and the science of architecture far more interesting than the superstition of architecture.
I agree. Thank you so much for being here today, Laine. This has been fascinating. I love these stories, and you're a good storyteller, which means, like I said, I could listen to this for an hour, but our time is up.
And it would go so quick. Thank you for having me again, Stacy. It was such fun, as always.
Same. Always good to see you. And again, I'll put the link to all of your things that you do at Our Restoration Nation. I will put those right on the show notes. So thanks,
Perfect.
Laine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to my guests, Andy Grinsfelder and Laine Berry. To continue the conversation, join us on Facebook or on Instagram. And to find out more about this episode and to request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.